History is a clock people use to tell the time of day. The history of a people should tell them who they are as a people, where they come from, what they have accomplished, and what they must accomplish. Since the beginning of humanity in Africa, from where our ancestors emerged, humans have sought answers about origins. Who are we? Where do we come from? How did the world begin? Their answers to these questions form the core of their communal identities. As human societies sought to ground contemporary experiences in the past and explain the familiar through stories, they come to define their places in the world through narratives. These narratives speak of creation, beliefs, and cosmogonies, which tell how the cosmos was created from a primal state. These narratives also speak of origin, which explain how extended families, social institutions, cultures, and humanity itself came into being. We may argue then that Africa is not only where our human ancestors developed, but also the front from which all human cultural traditions flowed. The idea of origin is prevalent in all human societies. However, only Africa can claim the origin of the species we now call human. Thus, the importance of its ideas about creation of both the world and humanity. And now, the story of creation from the Azande narrative.
Mbori created the universe long before the memory of any living being. Mbori is already invisible and seen in all creations, such as humans, the rivers, the mountains, the forests, and the savannas. Mbori created the universe of humans and animals at the same time and put the entire creation into a round canoe, which was shut tightly with one small entrance sealed with wax. A message was sent to Mbori's children, the sun, the moon, the night, the cold, the day, and the stars, telling them to come quickly to prevent the death of Mbori. The sun alone treated the messenger appropriately, and so the secret of the concealed entrance to the canoe containing the creation was revealed only to the sun. This is the creation narrative of the Azande people.
African civilizations, it all begins along the Nile. Parallel to the shores of the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, the Nile Valley stretches south of the 8th parallel north and as far as the Mediterranean. It crosses valleys starting in the Great Lakes region of Central Africa, with the most distant source in southern Rwanda, flowing north from there through Tanzania, Nyanza, Lake Victoria, Uganda, and southern Sudan. It gave birth to a bay, the Blue Nile, at Lake Tana in Ethiopia, and flows into Sudan from the southeast, uniting Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. Itiro swells through the Chad regions of the Tibesti and Inedi, the Libyan oasis, and the Suez Isthmus, carving wide access to the Mediterranean, thus open to east and west, south and north, and the Itiro corridor was a zone of privileged contact, not only between the African regions bordering it, but also with the more distant centers of the ancient civilization of the Arabian Peninsula, the Indian Ocean, and the Mediterranean world, west to east. The Nile was born around 30 million years ago, driven by the motion of Earth's mantle, the thick layer of rock between the Earth's core and crust. Its geographical position at the northeastern corner of the continent gifted it with the importance and advantages of becoming the site where Africans created the great civilizations of Kemet, Egypt, and Ta Seti, Nubia. This is the story of the civilizations along this 4,180 miles corridor. The question of the belonging of the civilization of Kemet, ancient Egypt, has been debated, contested, and mitigated. The colonial ideology that graded the field of Egyptology detached this most brilliant of the ancient civilizations of humanity from the continent to make it Eastern. Scientists of African descent have set the record straight, so much so that no serious specialist takes the risk of questioning the Kemet origin of this ancient civilization. Yet, there are still naysayers who, faced with mounting evidence, continue hiding under euphemisms such as ancient Kemet was African but just on the cultural aspect. They are heirs to a long tradition. As early as 1895, Gaston Maspero, in his Ancient History of the Peoples of the East, The Origins, Egypt, and Chaldea, placed the Kemetic civilization out of Africa and confidently asserted that the peoples of Kemet had lost very early memory of their origins and that their physiognomy, far from offering peculiarities or general aspect of the black, had the most beautiful analogy with the beautiful white races of Europe and Western Asia.
This is a story that tells the interconnectedness of art and life in Africa. It is evidenced in many African cosmologies that not only trace the origin of art to a high god or supreme divinity, but also identify the human body as a piece of sculpture animated by vital force. Babatunde Lawal said that African societies so valued art that they speak of the human as amegbeto, a modeled living clay, in the language of the Ewe people of Ghana and Togo. Such conception of the human as a work of art, which sees him or her as modeled living clay, calls for an understanding in which the human as a work of art transcends death for other existences. This multi-dimensional human, because a work of art, is then capable of dematerialization from the physical to the metaphysical or reincarnation. This multi-dimensional human, because a work of art, is then capable of dematerialization from the physical to the metaphysical, of reincarnation as a new baby, or even reappearing in other dimension. These artworks are then forges from which Africa builds the humans, endowing them with all the necessary knowledge for the Homo sapiens from Africa to begin the great migration through which they gave birth to humanity. These works transcend their consideration as art. They are vital forces incarnate embedding the very notion of being through the supreme divinity, which itself is understood as an art maker. They are expressions of an African genesis which speaks of the origin of the living being by the supreme divinity, sculpting or molding or drawing our coming to be. These works are then granaries of memory containers and contents whose presence is fundamental to the vitality of their societies. These codes, signs and symbols embedded in them formed the scientific capital of African societies. Through these works, we constructed a cosmogony, tracing our existence to the supreme divinity, as in the Yoruba, from whom Olodumare, God, the supreme, commissioned the creativity deity Obatala to mold the first human image from clay. We see here, act at the beginning, God's making of humans, a commissioned artwork. These objects of culture, of ontological significance, tell their creators who they are, what are the sources of the origin of the advanced creativity which, beyond the sacred, marked later periods and fields of expression.
Welcome to the Pan-African Contemporaneities. This visual story is one that has not yet been told, not because there is no storyteller to tell it, but because it exists only in fragments, each fragment asserting its own autonomous existence and remembering Pan-Africa. It is the story of visual artists who defy their otherness and enter the realm of mainstream art history, not only to lay their historical claim on it, but also to challenge the framework which defines and polices its boundaries. This exhibition engages African artists on the continent and the diaspora in their articulations of the lines of continuities, highlighting once more that we do not cease to be related simply because we were separated by oceans and deserts. Would it be possible to inscribe this story in the master narrative of contemporary art history? Would this not produce an irresolvable contradiction, a slap in the face of Hegelian metaphysics? Isn't the history of art still being written according to a European history framework in which only the European subject is privileged? And is it not that this privilege is achieved by arbitrary removal of other people's history and cultures from the dynamics of historical continuities? Contemporary Pan-Africa's concern is not to denounce the unicentric ideology, but rather to interrogate the nature of its narratives, to reveal the underlying myth which disguises those contradictions inherent in its aim, aesthetically, historically, and epistemologically. Pan-African arts have been fragmented in nationalities and geographic locations, yet despite their historical experiences of oppression and their resistance to it, they have produced trends and groundbreaking aesthetics that inspired global world movements from modernism to the contemporary. This exhibition strives to articulate the linkages inherent in Pan-Africanism. It builds on the spiritual and the political to revivify a culture in which the transnational nature of the Black experience removes the constraints, both physical and psychological. Pan-Africanism offers the theoretical superstructure, a place for articulation, a site, and a policy of representation, seen here as the junction of contemporary processes, which not only oppose the hegemonic models created by Western modernity, but also pose as alternatives to them. Pan-African contemporaneity is then a model for knowledge exchange between different geopolitical territories for access to different types of knowledge through different points of connection, as well as for the possibility of taking part in joint discussions.
This is a story that tells the interconnectedness of art and life in Africa.